Hello again, Michael Ware with the Iowa Firearms Coalition. Today I have a special guest. I saw Rhonda Mary. Thank you for being here today with us. I
Thank you for
saw her,
having me.
yeah, I saw her first as a guest on the virtual 2A rally not that many weeks ago. And I thought, she's telling a story, as many are, that basically help illustrate the virtues of the Second Amendment beyond just this person or this sex or this religion. And I really think that she's in a position to help enlighten us on some of those things. And I wanted to have her visit with us again today. So with that, I turn it over to you for a second to introduce yourself, Rhonda. Let us know what's going on here. We want to hear from you.
Okay, hey y'all. So my name is Rhonda Mary, and I am a YouTuber who has recently come into 2A advocacy. So I've been kind of doing some things, particularly trying to persuade women that look like me to learn more about firearm safety, gun ownership, and things like that. Because when I was young, it's just not a conversation that was had with me, at least not in a productive way. And so that's, basically what I've been working to do. But as far as my YouTube goes, my name is Rhonda Mary on YouTube. I talk about like politics, I talk about social issues, I talk about like some entertainment stuff and things like that. So
I see that you're not wearing your anti-status shirt. I
not today. I probably should have.
That's all right. For those of you out there, I'm not going to tell you about that, which is going to force you to check out our YouTube channel and see some of those videos. But I will give you it's not a spoiler alert so much as it is be looking for the anti-status t-shirt. It's become one of my favorites. And when I saw it the other day, I ordered one. So thank you for that. Uh,
Yes.
can I go back to something you mentioned in the intro here a second ago?
Sure.
You said that the conversation that surrounded guns or their use wasn't held in a productive manner or something like that. What's that actually mean? What do you mean by that?
So when I was growing up, whether this was by way of word of mouth, whether it was by entertainment, gun ownership was only for white supremacists, gangsters, and school shooters. That's always how that was presented to me. It's the only way it was presented to me.
Okay.
Gun ownership was never presented as virtuous, right? As a safety precaution, as taking care of your loved ones. It was just not presented that way at all.
And so your reflection on that's differently. I mean, quite different now, and why?
So, let's see. How do I want to explain this? So, it kind of happened simultaneously around the time that I was learning more going more heavily into like politics, the Constitution, law, also learning a lot about history, learn American history, learning more about Black history. This simultaneously kind of happened during an event where I was in a hit and run accident. And during that accident, at one point during this whole interaction, the guy stopped his car, and I'm thinking, oh, we're just gonna, just being very unaware, like, oh, we're just gonna pull out our insurance and everything will be okay, and he comes up to my car and is, berating me, just acting like really crazy. And he was so close to me that I remember the look in his eyes, and I just remember feeling so vulnerable. And so it was actually a police officer that happened to be a Black woman. She mentioned to me, she was like, "You didn't have a firearm on you?" And I'm like, no. And she's like, girl, at some point in that story, like you could say you feared for your life, right? And looking back, I don't think that would have been the particular situation at all to have used a firearm. However, I never, ever, ever wanted to be that vulnerable again. And also, once you start to learn about safe and responsible gun ownership, you also start to learn about de-escalation tactics. When is the proper time to use your firearm? And then all of the legal things and the things you have to think about after. So it may not even be the right situation to do so. But that kind of simultaneously happening with me already learning more about, like the Second Amendment and things like that, it just put me in a place where I was like, all right, it's time.
Can I ask you a question?
Hmm.
Okay, so our communications director and I made a video last night. I think it's up on our YouTube channel now, and it surrounded the idea that you just talked about. In that, when you take firearms training, you become more cognizant of the fact that when you have a gun, every conflict is an armed conflict. So
Yes.
you naturally, and from a point of responsibility and education, become a more passive person, I would say, because you
Yes.
understand there are long-reaching ramifications for having a firearm. So
Hmm.
it's almost as if the education that goes along with carrying a firearm civilizes our society more and more all the time.
I absolutely
Yeah.
100% agree with that, even from a personal stance, because now, right, like concealed is concealed. So if you conceal carry and the power, for the lack of a better term, that you have in that moment, that this other person could also have that same level of
Yes.
power. And so it's like, is this worth it for this situation? It causes you to think about everything differently, even your situational awareness.
Yes.
Like, I notice now, even if I'm sitting in a parking lot and a person parks in an odd way, or just does something that, makes you look or pay extra attention, and it's like, now I don't want to do things that could come off a certain way because of how other people could read into those things.
Right.
So you become more cautious, you become more self-aware, you gain more situational awareness, you learn more about the law. It's just a lot that comes with it.
I agree. I agree. It has all been good for me. I think that people make the assumption, based on being a chairman in our organization and having a firearms business, that I'm just a gun guy. And honest to goodness, I don't really think that adequately describes me. Yes, that's the medium I work in, and I know things about them, but
Hmm.
I was never a gun guy in terms of how
Hmm.
I was raised. I mean, oh yeah, we had them around and used them a little bit on the farm in Southwest Iowa, but it wasn't that big a deal. It was just part of culture and what we did and what we didn't do. The first time I carried, I remembered being so apprehensive. I thought everybody in the entire restaurant was looking at me, and I kept fidgeting to make sure that my gun wasn't
Uh-huh.
just uncovered, and so it's the same for everybody. And I think that that's a good thing, Rhonda, because what we're also saying is we recognize that this is not a small thing that we carry, and not a small
Hmm.
thing that we do, and so it needs to be given proper responsibility and a great deal of respect. So
Absolutely.
anyway, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
No, and I was gonna mention that, I'm kind of the same way. I'm not like a gun bunny. I'm not a super uh gun enthusiast, right? As like the type of firearms or the most expensive one or anything like that. Even as far as like how I carry, it's a lot of stuff I'm still learning as I go. But more importantly, I want to inspire people to learn more about this, and also let people know that you don't have to be like the Tomb Raider, specifically women, right? Like, you don't have to be a Tomb Raider. You don't have to dress like your boyfriend or your husband. You don't have to be super uncomfortable. I think, we can make this lifestyle where multiple people and different types of people can all find like what works for them.
Okay, I agree with that.
And it's
So
also it's also a mindset too, right? Because you have some people that's just never ever gonna carry firearms. Like, they're just not. They're not gonna carry them. And so even things that come along with it, like situational awareness, I think those are important conversations to have. And there are still different tactics and things people can learn to put themselves in a better position to be safer.
I agree. I have women routinely that will call up or come to the shop, many of them local because they know me or know of me. So I think there's a sense of either a knowing or maybe some familiarity that allows them to come and tell their story. And so I hear a lot of things that maybe other people don't know, or maybe they don't know about. So an example would be a woman that is going through a messy divorce with a husband, or a breakup with a significant other that they've had for a long time, and they're scared, or they may have some sort of restraining order against the other person. And they're like, well, if I get this gun, I'll feel safe. I'm like, well, a self-defense tool is not a bad idea, but what I really want you to consider doing first, or before you decide to go do this, use this tool, are things exactly what you're talking, like what you're talking about, Ron. I'm talking about situational awareness classes, risk assessment classes,
Mhm.
self-defense. When you do those things, you kind of train your brain to look at things differently, and I
Right.
would say as a result, you're less likely to be in bad scenarios by virtue of having the training, and seeing things differently and looking at them differently.
I think it definitely lessens the chances. Absolutely.
Yes, I mean, an analogy I make to a lot of women is, you're leaving the grocery store or the mall or wherever it is. You've got an armload of packages. You're going out there. It's dark, and thankfully you parked under the light. I lecture my wife all the time. Pick the spot where there's a lot of light, and so you get out there and you've got an armload of kids or groceries or whatever else. And the first thing you do is you hit your unlock button. Quink, quink. And then what do? You put your head down and shove all your groceries and your kids in the
Mhm.
car. That's when
Mhm.
these guys make the last 30 or 40 feet over to you. So what you should be doing is going quink, quink, and then putting your head on a swivel and looking around, because that's when you catch them.
Right.
And then they stop, turn around, or figure this person's a really
Yes.
lousy victim, and
Exactly,
they go.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And you didn't even need a firearm for that situation.
right.
A lot of times crimes are, those petty crimes, they're crimes of opportunity. They're going to try to attack the person that's the easiest to just get in and get out for whatever that may be, money or whatever, whatever the situation calls for. But a lot of times, noticing it and recognizing it, like you said, is going to throw them right off of that path. Like, she's not the right one. Let's try to go for somebody else.
Right. Or she just saw me. Now I can't smack her from behind and take her
Right.
purse and go. I'm not
Mhm.
going to go through with this. And so
Right.
it makes you less likely to be a victim. And I think that's very important.
Mhm.
So I appreciate how you got started here. So what are you doing now, and how is the Second Amendment looking to you, and how do you apply that?
So right now, I'm basically kind of working as like a liaison, kind of helping people network between finding resources to become more trained, to link up with actual trainers and
Okay.
things like that. So a lot of times, whether it's by way of email, by DMing me on Instagram, or Twitter, people just ask me questions, right? I try to give off this very just girl next door vibe, which I don't know everything. I'm still learning and helping connect people with resources. So if they ask me about holsters, if they ask me about the best way to carry, if they ask me about safety training, if they want a particular type of trainer, trying to connect people directly with those things. So that's mostly what I focus on for the most part is regards to 2A. And then I also, it's slowed down a little bit now because it's getting colder and because of COVID and flu season and things like that. But I've also been doing some stuff over at my YouTube. Like I recently went to the gun show in Virginia and I did interviews there asking people about, just what the 2A means to them and gun ownership and what they think about red flag laws. And like you mentioned early on, spoke at the virtual 2A rally, and I've been invited other places. And so, to share my story, kind of get it out there, helped, diversify some of these stories because, sometimes like even me, that situation that I had with that officer, it could have I know it had a lot to do with the actual trauma of the situation,
Yeah.
but also it's a comfortability of someone telling me I've never heard this from anybody like this before in this way, and so me just trying to share my story. And also, like I mentioned earlier on, a lot of times when we think about women and firearms, they try to make it such a like gun bunny or Tomb Raider thing. And I'm like, no, this could be a everyday thing for
Yeah.
everyday women.
Yeah.
You don't have to have any special tactical gift to start learning.
Right. Well, one of the things that, let me back up just 1 second. So where in the country are you located?
I'm in Mississippi.
So do you find that your message resonates locally, or is it universal?
I think it's universal.
I do too. I really do.
I think
So
it's universal.
when people I think that's the beauty of the internet. I mean, there's a lot of things about it I don't like, but the ability for anybody anywhere to ask you this question via Instagram, like you said, Twitter, posting a comment or a concern on your YouTube channel, that transcends where you happen to live as opposed to what's going on and what's happening here in this neighborhood or whatever else. Now, granted, this is the Iowa Firearms Coalition, so we're primarily interested in the shaping of Second Amendment virtues in this state, but we're not remiss enough to figure that it doesn't matter for our neighbor next door, Missouri to the
Right.
south and Nebraska to the west, and off we go. So we are connected, and we're part of the same country and part of the same culture on many, many levels. So I think that your message, our message, I truly believe is universal. I do.
And it resonates. It resonates with a lot of people and allows people to think about gun ownership, particularly from my demographic, in a way that they may have not thought about it before.
Okay, why is that? Is it because other people shared your experience of hearing guns are associated with this bad thing, and oh, by the way, it's the antithesis of you, or are there other things that go into that?
I think it could be personal experiences, right? So like me sharing my story and people being like, things, similar. I've been in similar situations or situations where I could have been in danger. Also, if you just look at what's happening around us, it's unfortunate, but COVID has opened up a lot of eyes. You have a government that has put millions of people out of work. Right? We're going into winter time when we already know that armed robbery usually tends to go up during those colder months as we go into Christmas. And so you have all these people out of work, and then you have some of these cities that's saying, "Oh, we're not gonna send a police to help you. We don't have the time or the resources for that right now. Like, just do what you can and just comply with the criminals." And so unfortunately, my story helps, but when you add that on top of what is already going on in the country, people are in a very fearful state right now. A lot of people.
Well, Iowa's legislative session basically begins in the first couple weeks in January, and it doesn't last very long. It only goes till usually it's supposed to end up the tail end of April, the beginning of May. So it's kind of abbreviated compared to many people's. And what we're going to hear in remarks on subcommittees regarding the legislation, the Second Amendment virtues that we want considered in committees and on open floor debate are people that are going to say the opposite of what you just said. And then they're going to say this about you. They're going to say, I have young Black women in my constituency that don't want these things or don't need these things because of this, this, and this. And when I hear legislators say that, sometimes I ask myself if they're even being honest with themselves or whether it's just the marching orders that they get. But I would like for you to be able to refute some of that. So when I hear those things, I'm disadvantaged by who I am and what I assumed to represent, rather than the idea that the Second Amendment is universal and it's for everybody. People seem to apply that incorrectly, and I don't like that. But there's not a lot that I can say about that that's really going to push and make waves. You're in a different position. You represent the people, in my opinion, who have been most disenfranchised most often, and you're saying, wait a minute. I was sold a bum bill of goods. This isn't true. And now that I look at this differently, I'm empowered and protected. I'm taking responsibility for myself, just like all of you people should. So what do you
So
say to those people?
So if you actually look at the statistics, right? Somebody that looks like me, as opposed to you, has a higher chance of dying in a domestic situation.
They
I
do.
have a higher chance of being affected by gun violence. oftentimes where people like me typically live, it is proven that the police take longer. Okay, they take longer to show up to these different situations. And so, I mean, we can look all throughout history, and in these areas, policing has failed. I don't care how people feel about the surface level or the representation of Black Lives Matter. We know that that movement was basically hijacked um, to extend an agenda. However, in these local communities and even how that organization started, it came from a very genuine place, and it was a problem with policing. And so regardless of even the aspect or the level that we're looking at that from, but what we know about government is that oftentimes it fails. It doesn't work well,
Yes.
particularly in inner, highly populated areas. It doesn't. We can look at LA. We can look at what's happening in New York. All of the people being assaulted on the
Yeah.
subway, you know, where you can't have firearms, and the things that's going on
Yeah.
with crime and things like this. And so what I would say is I trust myself more than I trust police officers.
Well, you could relegate that to everything. You should trust yourself more than anybody else, more than administration or
Absolutely.
whatever else. And so for years, what we have heard is, you don't need this weapon, you don't need this thing, you don't need, we're going to go ahead and curtail your rights. Now, they don't actually say that, but that's
Hmm.
what they're doing. And then they're offering some sort of olive branch in the form of, Uncle Sam's going to come and help you. So whether that be a policeman, or whether that be the court after something's happened, whatever else, we're going to go ahead because government's here to give you a helping
But
hand.
they failed. They failed time and time again. And what I'm trying to help people see is if they weren't failing, why has Black Lives Matter been able to have a national platform? It's because the failures of the government. It's not even just policing. It goes into a
Yeah,
lot of areas. Even as I mentioned COVID
yeah,
earlier, all of these restrictions putting people in the inner cities out of work
yeah,
and saying, hey, we're going to give you a stimulus. And where the heck is the second stimulus? So the proof is right in front of us. It's not anything special I have to do. We've always known that the police take forever to show up. We always know that if that police officer is scared when he gets there and you fit the description, it may cause even more of a problem than he came in to solve.
yeah,
So a lot of these things are right in front of us. They're not hidden. It's just the way they're packaged.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
It's to benefit the politicians, and they package these things in a very malicious, kind of tricky way.
Yeah. There's some of the problems here in Iowa are similar to that, but then there are some that are really at the other end of the spectrum. I'll give you an example. Uh, I happen to know a lot of the police officers locally, but I live in a relatively rural, well, it's a very rural county, and our population's very spread out. So the nearest town to me is less than 1,000 people, and I live in the country. So, and I know that there's only so many deputies, and there's only 35,000 people in the entire county. And I don't remember what I was told, but I want to say there was 900 or 1,000 miles of county roads in my county alone. And at any given time, there's probably only one deputy patrolling.
Mhm.
And so that's just the way that it is. So to be honest with you, Rhonda, if I have a problem, and let's say, and I know many of these policemen very well, and I happen to like those folks. What happens if they're at the other end of the county? There's no way, Rhonda, that they can
That
be
they
on
can
my
make it to
doorstep.
you.
Yeah,
Right.
even if they moved heaven and earth, there's a travel time associated with getting there, even if everything else goes well. So a lot of Iowa is made up of the of Iowa, or the vast majority of the state's made up of these rural areas, where it's not that I can't have confidence in some of these police officers, but it's more so I know rightly, as much as they would prefer to be there, they can't make it, and not
Right.
quickly enough. So that responsibility falls back on me, because unless I'm assigned one to sit right here on my shoulder, which I might do, I might not do. But unless I have that, then I have to take responsibility for myself. And I'm not going to be ashamed about doing that.
Absolutely. And the crazy thing about it is, I was talking about with these malicious politicians, how they have security oftentimes.
Oh, yeah.
They have firearms. They have the ability to protect themselves. And they come in, with these sweet words saying, oh, you don't need that. You don't need that. That's only people like me need that. How is that not elitist and
It is elitist.
privileged?
It is. They're saying, I need this for myself because, and oh, by the way, you don't need it for you. And then sometimes they don't even offer the because. So as we go into our legislative session again, we're going to have legislators that specifically say these things aren't necessary. They're bad for families. They're bad for communities. And they'll go right down the list. They'll assert victim status to everything so that it'll make themselves look as if these people are victims by alienating or making barbaric the use of a self-defense tool or the idea behind it. And I don't like that, because it's basically taking the whole thing out of context, and it's akin to lying. And in some cases it is a
Right.
bold-faced lie.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They lie often. And it makes me think of Lil Wayne, the rapper, who, not this recent case that he's dealing with, but this was several years ago when he was touring in New York, and he basically caught a charge for gun possession. Didn't hurt anybody, no violent act committed, and had to do time for simply possessing this firearm. Now, this is an actual celebrity that they're telling, you don't deserve the right to protect yourself. How does that even begin to make sense to people? I just don't understand.
I don't know. Well, I wanted to cover a few things today, and I want to see if you would share the time, and I thank you for doing that. Are there parting ideas that we need to be thinking about as we move into our legislative session, when we talk to people who say, okay, let me break this down. They're not going to look at you, Rhonda, and they're not going to say, you don't need this. And they're not going to do the same thing to me, because neither one of us will accept it. But they will imply that Second Amendment virtues and the things associated with them are wholly bad, or in large part bad. So what would you say in one sentence, if you could talk to those people right now, what would you say to them?
So I want gun owners to think about the way that they talk about gun ownership, right?
Okay.
And not always taking the prepackaged media route that falls into the ill intent of how the media is already trying to package gun ownership, right? So telling those very personable stories and making them relatable. Also, this awesome book that I have, Negros and the Gun. This is by Nicholas Johnson. This book is a really awesome resource
What's the author?
about Nicholas Johnson.
Okay.
And this book is a really awesome resource. It talks about the history of arms for African Americans in America, right? In American history. A lot of this stuff is hidden from us, and it's purposely done. It's the history of arms is hidden from people that look like me, because they don't want us to be empowered by these stories.
Okay.
Why during Black History Month can we not talk about the history of arms as it deals with the Black community? A lot of people don't even know that people like Rosa Parks were pro firearm, pro protecting yourself. A lot of times, in back then they had like the Winchester. They talk about the Winchester rifle and things like that. But a lot of that history is intentionally left out. And so I feel like sharing these stories like this can be empowering, but it's very hard to know when things like this is hidden, and your mainstream media is only telling you, oh, gun ownership only looks like these bad people.
Right.
The things I mentioned earlier, mainstream media is always, it's either the gangster, the school shooter, or the white supremacist, right?
Yeah.
But if we're sharing and telling stories like this and being like, do you know people like Rosa Parks were like pro-gun? It's
I
taking that
didn't know it.
narrative away. Yeah.
I didn't know it. I should
It's
have.
hid from us. It's hidden. It's hidden. It's done on purpose, right?
Yeah.
It's done on purpose. They don't want you to know that.
We
They
have a
don't want you to know that.
we have a tendency of going backwards, especially now. It's really ramped up, I would say. I don't want to get off on chase too many rabbits, but it's really ramped up in the postmodernist progressive movement, basically stemming from, I think, modern academia through the 60s on up. In that we have a tendency to go back, and I don't know if whitewash is the right word, but we downplay the things that we don't like, and then we prop up others that
Absolutely.
are probably a little hollow. Well, that's not an accurate reflection of a reflection of history, and it's well, I think that it's unethical because we're really not telling the truth at that point.
Exactly. We're not telling the truth. We're not telling the full story. And so you're depriving these communities of a full story. Gun ownership adds to the quality of life, and it has a very huge history going in between slavery and civil rights. And I feel like if more people knew that, it's super empowering. Adding that onto to the fact that I have this right in the first place, right? But adding that onto
Yes.
knowing that I have ancestors that believe this and use this for their benefit and to add to the quality of their life, that's very empowering. And it makes me like, I'll never give up my gun now, knowing that.
Well, good for you. I think this is fantastic. I didn't know about that book. I want to believe that somewhere in my notes I've got a copy of that because I actually went down that path and there were several that I bought. I've got a stack of books around me that are mile deep that I have not read yet that are on my list. But I'll add that to them if it's not already there because I want to understand that properly. And again, that's part of history, regardless whether it's as you said earlier, and I think that's a kind of a fine way to put it. As somebody that looks like you or somebody that looks like me, that history is relevant and it's valuable no matter what, because you and
Right.
I are talking about rights, human rights, our core civil rights that apply to everyone. You know what I mean? And they're not supposed to be curtailed, manipulated, or taken away or chipped away at. They're for all of us, regardless. Again, sex, race, religion, lack thereof, it doesn't matter. And I think history falls into that criteria. That history is for all of us to understand, but we have to go seek it.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, in parting, is there anything that we can do for you, or what do you need from us here in Iowa?
Just go subscribe to my
Okay.
YouTube. I'm not very far from the 10,000 subscribers, so I'm trying to get there. I'm Rhonda Mary on Instagram and on YouTube. I have my anti-status t-shirts that are available. Those are in all my links on my social media. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad that you took the time for today. I know that we had a little bit of trouble getting it all set up in a timely fashion, and we're very busy and the world doesn't stop turning for us, but I really appreciate you making the time. So if there's something that I can do for you personally or professionally, or something that IFC can be helpful with in growing these channels or having another conversation, seek us out. We'll help any way we can.
Thank you so much.
You guys have a great day. Thanks again from the Iowa Firearms Coalition, Rhonda Mary. Thank you so much.